keep your friends close, keep your family close. It's really important. Look for the resources. I definitely took a lot of hardship on myself, and it was like, my mistakes and my fault, and I was quite brutal towards myself. And that would be something I'd just be, it's all right, mate. You're doing a good job. Keep going.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Burnt Chef Journal, a hospitality-specific podcast dedicated to challenging mental health stigma and conversations designed to inspire a new, healthier, happier, and more sustainable hospitality profession. The Burnt Chef Journal is proudly sponsored by Planday, the workforce management system that helps your business give a shift. From scheduling rotas ahead to tracking time and attendance, managing your team's careers to managing your budgets, Planday has everything you need to make your day work in one easy-to-use platform. Try it yourself with a 30-day free trial only at planday.com. Get your shift together with Planday. Okay, this week we are joined by no other than Daniel Garwood, who's dialing in from New York currently. Daniel is a chef / partner of New York City restaurant ACRU, if I've said that right, Daniel?
Yes, you have, mate.
Nice, thank you. His first solo project that is centered around a tasting menu inspired by Daniel's Australian roots and decade of cooking at some of the world's top restaurants, such as Atomix, Cadu, and Evet. Born and raised in Tasmania, Australia, Chef Daniel Garwood's love for cooking began at a young age. After graduating from culinary trade school in Sydney, he began his professional career at local restaurants while competing and winning at some of Australia's major culinary competitions, including the Nestle Golden Chef's Hat, which we are partners for. Daniel went on to travel abroad and stage at some of the world's top restaurants, such as the Waterside Inn by Elaine Roon over in the UK, Faviken in Sweden, and In de Wolf in Belgium, as well as being part of the opening teams for several award-winning restaurants in Australia, including Firedor and Silver Eye. Previously to opening ACRU, which is in partnership with the NAEUN Hospitality Group, the team behind some of New York's most renowned concepts, Daniel held the position of sous chef at 2 Michelin-starred restaurant Atomix. So Daniel, thank you ever so much for joining me on today's podcast. Did I make any mistakes during the intro?
Jeez, I was going to say, mate, what an intro that was. Very much appreciate that. It's my whole life story, pretty much done in a couple of minutes there.
There we go. We can wrap the podcast up. That's good, guys. You've heard it all here first. Mate, I don't know where to begin. You've got such an incredible background, and I haven't even mentioned the collaborative work that you've done in mental health and suicide prevention for Lifeline Career and so much more. So for once in my life, I'm a bit stumped on where to start. So I guess let's take it back to the beginning. What age and what got you into hospitality? And just paint the scene for us a little bit before we go into some of your incredible impacts over the years.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so basically my career kind of started, working in Domino's actually when I was like 13. My goal since I was about 4 or 5 was to become a chef. And, my parents are quite supportive of being in working in trade, where my mother works in textiles, my father works in automotive. It's a bit of like a trade family, and something like, come from a small town in Tasmania, like Launceston. And it was just something that was like quite heavily encouraged. And like in the Tasmanian government really supports it. You can pretty much leave, school grade 10, as long as you're going into a trade and a trade certificate and a job, they support it. So that seemed like the best kind of option for me, especially as like, not someone really interested in school and studying, like for just quiet work. And then the intense environment of a kitchen is always like, I've always been drawn to that, especially from going from, I went from Domino's when I was like 13 to 14, and then I started as a kitchen hand when I was 15, and then I started my apprenticeship at the back end of like 15, 16, working for one of the bigger hospitality groups in Tasmania.
Man, and what was it like? You said this is often I tend to get asked the question. It's like, does hospitality, especially being a chef, does it attract those who like that sort of environment, or does it make individuals who grow to love it? Like, so what was it about you? You said it was that type of environment that worked well for you. What was it that appealed to you first?
I was going to say, I think the first thing that kind of appealed is like, well, one, the fast pace of the environment. But then again, it's like kind of as you were saying, it's like, depending on like the hospitality environment. So I just happened to be in one that was like quite heavily disciplined. So it was like fast paced and it was disciplined. And it's like, I spent most of my early childhood life doing taekwondo. Like I did taekwondo for about 12 years. I found there was to be like, similar forms of discipline in that kind of sense by working in a kitchen, like, you're always going through the same repetitions of doing these tasks and doing things. You're trying to get faster, you're trying to get better, like, and then especially I did a lot of like competitions as well, like, competing in Taekwondo. And then so I actually found myself in a restaurant, in an environment where I was doing, training, like, with ex-Bocuse d'Or guys. And also, so you're getting trained for a service, and then they're also training you for the competitions. I found that to be just a really like a common denominator, and something that I really enjoyed.
It's so funny you should mention that. I did 10 years of martial arts myself. So Goju-Ryu, which is from Okinawa originally, it's like a mix of karate and a bit of judo. And I think I've only ever mentioned it once before, but there are a lot of similarities between that, that respect, that discipline, that perfection. Your katas or katas, however you want to say it, they have to be pinpoint. Otherwise, in competitions and stuff, you get knocked down, or someone will come up behind you, and not aggressively, but they'll slap you on the back of the neck to make sure that you're all tense in the right areas or trying to move your feet. So it's so interesting that you should mention that. And so what was your first foray into, because you've spent a lot of time in many different countries, what was your first foray into the sort of fine dining area?
It was quite hard. I definitely worked through different stages of fine dining. So I guess the place I kind of worked at, it was a hotel restaurant, but it was called the Henry Jones Art Hotel in Tasmania. But again, they were really supportive of more doing competitions. That's where I did and won all of my big competitions. And then I started going to more like the restaurant fine dining kind of scene when I was about 18, 19, working at a 2-hat restaurant in Tasmania. And then straight after that, when I left Tasmania at 19, I moved to Faviken. That was kind of my first really like intense, like live on site work in fine dining. It's this place up in like northern Sweden, like 2 Michelin-star. And it's like, you don't live on the property, you live like 40 minutes away, but you live with all the other employees. And it's like, we're pretty much getting up at like, 6, 7 a.m. And then, the guys pick you up, and then I spend the next 8 to 10 hours foraging. And then you're back in the restaurant getting ready for service. And then you've got 14 guests and you're doing like 36 courses.
36?
Yeah, it's crazy. And then you do that in about 2.5 hours. So it's just everything, big clock up on the wall, and everything's just timed, and it's so military and so disciplined. At the same time, when you're doing something like that military and disciplined, when you're working with nature, so you have to go out and find, everything on the property essentially. So you got to find like the perfect blueberry leaf. And so it's like half the time I'd come back, and then the chef just be like, no way. If I've got to go find the perfect one, that's going to take me a good 20 minutes. So just get your shoes on, run back out into the forest, and then try and find these perfect leaves. And then it's like, especially when the winter starts coming on and the snow's all down, and then you really like, you're digging through snow to find like 14 pieces of perfect wood sorrel, which is really fun at the time. Like, I was young enough to do it. I don't know if I could do it now, but it's definitely a cool experience.
I think it's an experience that a lot of people like miss out on as well. Like, as I think, we're taking a lot of people away on foraging trips in the UK, which we want to try and replicate elsewhere in the world. But it's important for a lot of chefs and hospitality for like individuals alike, professionals alike, to start to understand a little bit more about where some of the food comes from and how it's nurtured, how it grows, but also exactly the sheer volume of food that is edible and that can be found just growing in nature. I mean, seaweed, for example, like you wouldn't get a great deal of seaweed inland, but seaweed is, I think 90% of seaweed is edible and actually really high in vitamin C and other great things as well.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, seaweed's like probably one of the more interesting ones, because it's almost one someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's pretty much, I don't think you can be allergic to it. Like, I've never heard of an allergen to do with seaweed. So that's why it's also really interesting to look at that. And then also the different flavor profiles.
Yeah, for sure, man. And then obviously the things that grow along with it, like we were foraging for sea aster and sea purslane, and you get your samphire, and then all of a sudden you just wade into the ocean and you can pick up like thong seaweed or spaghetti seaweed and just start eating it. It's so underutilized. And I know perhaps it brings me on to some more of the different styles of influences, but over here we don't use it nearly enough. Whereas I think in the Southern Hemisphere, it's used a lot more, right?
Oh, definitely.
So what was that like for you? You working in Tasmania, you've cutting your teeth in Australia, and then you just leave the country and head across to a completely different climate, different culture. What was it like? What in terms of an experience?
I mean, it was definitely incredible, because I had a really good stint over there. So after I went to Faviken, I went to Italy and then to Belgium for a couple of stints, and then I came back to Australia afterwards. So that was probably my first time, away, getting to also travel and work at the same time. And so it was just an interesting culture. I was quite lucky. The people that I worked for in Tasmania, like one guy was from the UK, and another guy had spent a bit of time working in Denmark, and they really heavily encouraged, to get out there and travel and experience the world, and then, you'd be able to bring something back to Australia, which obviously didn't quite do, but, we ended up in New York. But it was like just seeing the vast difference in cultures, and how even within a small space, and how different, because everything's a bit tighter over in Europe, and how everyone handles everything so differently, but also with such a rich culture behind it. I think that was probably the most important part, because especially when you're coming from a place like Australia, where it's it's quite a new country, and we're pretty much living off the roots of older cultures and just all kind of put together in a sense.
Yeah, I suppose, you've got more heritage, haven't you? Like if you're over in somewhere like Belgium or Italy, everything there's a story, it's attached to generations, whereas maybe places like Australia and States as well, I guess, are, as you say, relatively new. So the influences are being borrowed from other cultures and mixed matched. And so over that period of time, did you, sounds like such a cheesy question, but did you miss home? Did you ever think, fucking hell, what am I doing? This is mad. I'm just going to head back. Or
I was going to say, I think the only time I ever really got that feeling was probably the first time when I moved to Korea, quite some years later. Living in the European countries was, it's quite similar. Everyone kind of speaks English. You can get by and everything. And then when I moved to South Korea, that was the first time I really felt okay, wow, I have no idea what's going on. Everything's so different. And it's I remember just calling my father a couple of times, just within the first couple of weeks, couple of months, and it's just I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't understand anything. I can't communicate. It's kind of trapped in a little bit. And that was a unique time. Then I missed home. But again, just my father told me to kind of stick it out. Just, give it a year. Okay, if it doesn't work out. I think it seems like a bit more of an older mentality, and a lot of people don't really think that like that now. But it definitely worked out. I ended up staying there for 3 years, and it was the best time of my life. Once I started to get used to things, and I actually quite miss Korea a bit more than I even miss going back to Australia now.
Bloody hell. So, I mean, look, I said at the beginning of this call, and I tend to say it a lot to individuals, I fucking love this industry, right? I genuinely believe it's got a bright future, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for everything, the individuals, the work environments, the seasons, everything about it. There's always something new to learn, right? But I often say that you can work absolutely anywhere in the world in hospitality. You don't need to learn the language. You've got the skill sets, and often enough, you don't need to speak a word of the language, and you can get by. So going to Korea, are you fluent in Korean when you got there? Was it something you just picked up? Or?
Oh, geez, absolutely not. I tried to practice some of the words, and then turns out my pronunciation was completely off. And then mixed in with my Australian accent, no one could understand the word I was saying. It was brutal. And then even towards the end, it was more funny, how quickly Korea kind of develops. Is a lot of people that were coming into the restaurant, the real running. So it was run by two guys, from Tasmania, and Joe, he can speak pretty fluent Korean. But a lot of the guests would come in just by the end of the 3 years could speak English. There's a lot of obviously a trade between Korea and the States. And so a lot of people, want to obviously grow their companies and so on like that. So a lot of people could speak English. And then I ended up getting tied in with a lot of the international community over there. And it's I can speak a bit of Korean, and my wife's Korean. So it's but half the time she does the translating for me. It's brutal.
So, you said you stayed out there for 3 years and you miss it. So again, proof's in the pudding, not being able to speak the language just shows how transferable these skills are. In terms of the mise en place and the work and the menus that you're putting together in the dishes, was that quite a new skill set that you had to learn, or to build your repertoire of recipes?
Completely. So it's when you come over, so I especially, because I moved from Denmark, where you're looking at you put all the nice, beautiful produce, where it's you kind of minimalist intervention. You not do much, put it on the plate, and then just treat it really well. You could do lots of different things in that kind of sense. And then moving to Korea, it's we didn't even have basic kind of root vegetables. If you can imagine, one of the biggest things they have is is the Napa kind of cabbage, the cabbage they use for kimchi. And then it was a lot of different watercresses, but I wasn't really fluent with any of the kind of the root vegetables they have, daraji, durup, and these other ones where it's it took us quite a bit of time to get used to using them, and how do you actually use it into a sense of where we'd been trained. And then we realized that just didn't really make sense, because we really wanted to stick with that kind of new Nordic movement where we're only using things from Korea, but we're using international ideas to put it on the plate. And that proved to just be also, we spent every weekend, we're going out to a different supplier, we're going foraging for different things. It's like, we'd go out diving with, they call them like the Henyos, which is like, the traditional divers that are down in like Busan and Jeju. And like they take us down, you're pulling out all like the weird like sea cucumbers and sea pineapples. And it's like things you've just never seen before. It was so stunning and like just so much fun to do that kind of exploration in this place. And then it's like you find this like mini root vegetable this is like how they value things. Like usually like age is probably the most prominent thing that they put like cause it's like expense. So like we're foraging these like little daraji, which is this tiny little root vegetable, has quite prominent flavor. But like we picked this one out, and this guy said that's worth $2,400, and you're like, and then it's like we were doing it for a TV show, and we didn't know what to use it for because it's so hard to use. And we ended up putting it in an ice cream, and then I don't know if people were offended or not, but it was just like I thought it was really tasty, but just quite crazy.
Wow, I mean, I feel like we should do a test there's a supplier over in the UK that does Dorset Blue Vinny ice cream, so blue cheese mixed in with the ice cream, which is a bit of an assault on the senses. But yeah, maybe we put the two side by side and just see which one wins. Did it taste it? Did it work? Besides, obviously, the fact that it was a really expensive ingredient. Did it work? Did the flavor profile go?
Oh, I would say so. I thought it was great.
You mentioned your wife, Suki Yam. She works in hospitality as well. No,
she works in tech. So really, I've actually found that to be one of the best things for mental health in my state is like to work with someone be with a partner who works in like a different field. You've got something to go home and talk about, other things with, especially actually when we did like the mental health project and when we did the book, it was like, it was really fun to work together because I mean, she's 1,000 times more efficient on a computer than I am. So, like working through all the information, trying to source everything, it's like, it was a really good way to kind of come together, the two different skill sets.
Of course, and it was something that we didn't mention in the initial intro, but both of you put together as Oralis, conversation of food and mental health. Talk to me about this book. What's the inspiration behind it? I mean,
it was quite a funny one. So, I mean, so basically, even when I was living in like Denmark and like, I did some travels over between Denmark and Ireland where we were doing dinners in collaboration with Lifeline. And I was like, just to try and raise awareness for mental health and suicide awareness. And then obviously I moved over to Korea. And then when you do the kind of research on Korea and you see what's kind of happening, and obviously it's just like, as per the facts, it's like the highest suicide rate per capita, in the world, and obviously increasing over the years when you look at like the Economist point. And it's like, so I kind of wanted to, do an event there. So I tried to make it a bit of a bigger deal than what I'd kind of previously done. And I put a bit more conceptual thought into it. So on like, I think it was in February, probably 2021, we did an event at Everett, which is like, 17 courses with each course being like on a different kind of area of what I perceived as mental health at that time and just in general. And then like, so we did the event, we had everything quite well documented. And then, I mean, there was two reasons for doing the book. One was to kind of get that information out there because I wasn't sure if the message had relayed really well through the dinner. Like if I wasn't sure if it was like a bit too intense and like, I kind of wanted to reach a wider audience. So that's why we did the book and we did it half in English, half in Korean, just so, two birds, kind of one stone. But then also the other reason was like to create a format for chefs that are doing their own pop-ups. So we pretty much put all the data in there and what it takes to actually do a really successful pop-up, like, designing the menus, graphic designs, bookings, selling tickets, how do we, the clothes that we got made, all the branding and stuff that goes into it. Like, all that was also in the book as well, just to really kind of like teach some of these young guys instead of like just showing up to a place and cooking some food. It's like, well, no, I think you need to conceptualize it a bit more. So especially when you like start looking into a restaurant, like all those skills are quite easily transferable. Obviously, you got to do it at a bigger scale when you're doing a restaurant, but it's still the same relative ideas, creating your brand and your image and what you want to do. But especially when it came to doing the book to try and get that message out to the Korean public of the mental health awareness, it was one of those quite funny things that I don't think it was as well received. Probably coming from a foreigner in Korea talking about some of these ideas, which I learned quite quickly, which was definitely a fascinating sense. And that's more half the reason why I've actually ended up in the States is to kind of like if I can build up my reputation and everything here, and I have success. And then I can do more work with mental health here. And then maybe I can come back to Korea at some stage with a bit of prestige and talk about these issues. And then I might have more success and chance at that point.
Interesting. So, I mean, obviously we operate in over 78 countries, but there are certain cultures, I would say, where this subject matter isn't discussed. So you talk about prestige, and I guess from a brand awareness point of view, yes, it helps get people interested. But from a cultural element, would you say it was the cultural element that you were finding the barriers with when you're trying to open up these conversations?
Oh, I definitely can. That would probably be definitely the biggest thing. It's just like, you can see a lot of the similar things that kind of happen here as well. And it's just like, you don't want to, like, you can't really talk about someone's culture. You can't say, hey, this is probably, it's better to obviously talk about these things and say, hey, this is just what I think. And, there's kind of like facts between, like, we're all human beings. This is what's going to affect us, as opposed to saying, I mean, there's something wrong with the culture or something can be adjusted in that culture. It's like, no, that's not the move.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that binds us all together is the fact that we are all human beings, right? And I don't claim to understand any other cultures in this one, and certainly the Western culture that I'm in currently. But for us, it's, especially with the terminology. I mean, for example, in Italy, they don't have an Italian phrase for burnout. It's not a term that's used. Or in other countries, perhaps, like, for example, in Dubai, we meet some resistance because it's not done. It's not, you just don't talk about any signs of sort of weakness from that perspective. However, I think whereas the world has changed and more cultures sort of merged together, and you've got expats in different parts of the world, I think these conversations are spurring curiosity. So, in terms of let's start with the event first. Was it a success? Did you get bums on seats? Were there people paying attention?
Yeah, it was quite a funny one. I mean, because we did it over the course of 2 days. And I remember on the first day, it's like, my wife's parents came in, and I remember telling some of the stories and everything. And then I saw, like, her mum, like, crying at the table. She was, like, so emotional, like, really attached to the idea and thought it was quite brilliant. But at the same time, I couldn't really tell at the time. I was just like, oh no, I just made, my wife's mum cry. This is, I'm not so sure about this. And then ended up being a really great experience. But it's like, is that the kind of, like, dining experience you want to have and, like, talk about these issues? So I went at it very conceptually a bit too far, I would say. That was probably the biggest thing I learned. It'd be better just to have, like, a really fun, nice, like, really good food and good meal, talk about other issues like sustainability or just really nice produce, and then just come in with a couple of, like, ideas of, like, hey, just gonna put this out here, there's this idea, something to talk about, over a really good meal, as opposed to, like, a highly conceptualized. I went way too far, I would say. Even on the second day, we did have one table that actually walked out from it. Just, like, I don't think it's what they expected. They were just like, it's just too much for us. We actually just came out for dinner, and I was like, yeah, it was pretty rough, but it was like, builds you a thicker skin, that's for sure.
So come on then. I mean, I am intrigued because we do pop up. I mean, our team of ambassadors over here, Adam Simmons and a whole load of our fantastic ambassadors did want to launch a new restaurant in London, Voyage, recently. And everyone was there and they knew why they were there. They knew what the cause was. And I mean, the response was fantastic. Luckily, we didn't have anyone walk out, but everything went perfect. So in terms of concept, what did you learn from that? What did you do that perhaps you wouldn't do again that might have pushed it too far? And I'm interested from my perspective so that we don't, we don't.
No, for sure. I mean, it was just like, 17 courses of each dish, pretty, like, highly conceptual. And, like, we're talking about, these big ideas. And especially, it's like, even if we imagine the one course is like, it was like a bunch of, like, different, like, grains and like local grains and everything. And it was all trapped within a leaf. Then we talked about, how people can start to feel like, mentally trapped and, like, some of their ideas and, like, no way to kind of express it. And it's like, I would not do anything kind of like that again unless there was more positive notes. If you're going to do something highly conceptual, you want to have, like, a pretty good balance and, like, not really attacking that far, as I found. I mean, I think it's like, as far as these ideas is like, especially this was like during COVID, and there's not much, expression of, like, talking to other people, like, hey, what do you think? I'm planning to do this kind of event. What are your thoughts? Am I going too far or not? Like, if I got a bit more of a census on it beforehand, I think I could have probably achieved something better. But I did go pretty hard for it in that kind of sense.
See, I'm hearing stuff like that, and I think that would work. I think if you were to do that over here in the UK, people would fucking love it, and maybe even in the States as well. And would, it's a lot of investment in time. You've just opened up a new restaurant, but if ever you fancy trying it again and just seeing if it works in a different country, then give us a shout, because I think people need a story, right? They need to understand what it is that, not just having the dining experience, but why it is so important, and understand the reasons for it. Because for those who've never experienced mental illness, you haven't got a clue, and hopefully you never will have a clue. But
I mean, that's also the other side. Sometimes it's ignorance is bliss, right? But it's quite funny you mentioned that, because I actually thought a bit more the same. If I'd done something that same concept in a different country. Like if I'd actually done that in Australia, probably would have had success. If I'd done it, UK or the US, probably would have had success. But then just going into like Eastern culture and doing that, maybe a bit too far. But also it could have been interesting to see if someone else had done something that kind of conceptual there.
Yeah, I mean, from the sound of things, you're trailblazing in terms of setting that up. I haven't met many people who have gone into a completely different culture and tried to open up dialogue quite as intricately as that, and fair play to you. But I generally do believe when it comes down to the subject of mental health that we're very young. We're still in nappies talking about this. And, even in our line of work, and we train all around the globe, we can train people on identifying the signs and opening conversations. But then once they've opened a conversation, then there's this whole big gap in the background. They go, well, what do I do now? Like, I've started a conversation. I don't know what to do. And what's mental hygiene and mental fitness looks like? Does it involve spending time outside looking for that perfect giraffe in a forest and, sinking your feet into the mud and getting grounded with nature? Well, that sounds a little bit too much for me, they might go. But actually, at the same time, that's the educational piece also that we need to get into the mix, because like physical health, you eat too much, you drink too much, you're going to get fat and potentially have health issues. And it's the same if we don't give our bodies the right nourishment, my brain's the right nourishment, we end up in the similar sort of thing.
Completely right.
Yeah. But it's education. Like when you and I, how old are you, Daniel?
30.
Okay. All right. Maybe when you were at school, maybe when I was at school, I never got taught about mental health or mental hygiene or anything like that, What about yourself? I mean, being 30, or perhaps the generation, I don't know what the generation labels are, but was that something that you ever spoke about at primary school or secondary school? Were you taught on that?
No, like definitely nothing in primary school or high school, that's for sure. But it's quite funny because the one thing that also really inspired me a lot to kind of like do Oralis and do the book was we did just like, it was a 2-day course when I was at like TAFE, the trade school, like while I was doing my apprenticeship. They had the guys out from OzHelp. These are 2 guys, ex-chefs or ex-industry workers. They just came out and they just gave us this really intense course of basically the things that are probably going to go wrong in the industry, like talking about like, drinking, drug abuse and things like that. And then there's like, look, this is what you need to work on. Like, this is why also they talked about like the Are You OK Day, which is in Australia, which is talked about one day in Australia, which is like getting close to like a national holiday of like, to take care of your mental health and everything like that. But I thought that course to be the more interesting thing because they were just saying the help's always out there. In Australia, we've got so many things like, Beyond Blue, Lifeline, and other places like that. Like you're going to have the resources. These are the things you might see and might happen, but please know like the resources are out there. This is some strategies you can do, but these are things you're probably going to see. I thought like the realist approach to that was quite fascinating and really helpful.
It's always been an interesting one for us to balance because the whole point of the Burnt Chef Project is to encourage more people to come and consider this as a valuable and a long-term career choice. But to do that, we have to sort of like pull up the curtain. We perform in the dark. We perform away from prying eyes. And often enough, that means that we can sort of pretend that things don't go on. But I guess it's that balance between going, look, these are some of the issues, but don't worry. Here are some of the potential educational tools or support mechanisms that can help with that. If you're enjoying this week's episode, consider heading over to our website and supporting our ongoing work in destigmatizing mental illness and creating a healthier, happier, and more sustainable industry by purchasing some of our branded merchandise. We have a whole range of t-shirts, hoodies, chef's jackets, well-being journals, plus a whole host more available on worldwide dispatch. All funds raised from sales of these items go towards free-to-access e-learning content, as well as providing free support systems and help for those who may be experiencing difficulty with their mental health. Having worked in so many different countries, different cultures, different environments, have you seen, I want to hear from you like the best culture and the most impressive culture you've seen, but I also want to hear of any sort of examples whereby, perhaps you haven't seen things go well or individuals are really struggling. You don't have to name any names, but I'm just curious, what country or where were you where you saw maybe the best example of great culture, great health, great balance?
I mean, it's going to be pretty much like the classic kind of response is Denmark, to be honest. And it's like, it's very funny to say, and I could try to figure it out. I mean, like, especially when I was working at Cadeau, and a lot of like, if it's a Danish chef, like led restaurant, like they're going to make sure, like, I mean, they have a terminology for it, which is called hygge. Whereas like, you're basically, if cozy's cozy, but you want your workplace to have a hygge environment where it's like, you come in the morning, you get your coffee, you get your breakfast, like, you kind of work through your day, you sit down, you have like a 45 minutes, hour for lunch. And then like, you maybe got a couple of things after work, but you should always be pretty relaxed. And that's obviously for some restaurants in Denmark, obviously not all of them. But a lot of the ones that are kind of Danish chef led, you'll find this kind of environment all the time. And it's like, I also, when I was like living in Korea, I was working with a guy, he was a Danish guy, he was the like CEO of Puma. And it's like pretty much saying a lot of the same things. Is like, when I talked about some of the pay and things in other restaurants, he just thought this was the craziest thing he ever heard of, because like, it's such a cultural thing for like the Danish to be in a hygge environment. And so I thought that was quite fascinating. But then at the same time, how you can actually reach that is like, also the cost of the menu for that restaurant was very expensive. And so like the restaurant can actually generate a high enough wage that you can pay people a good salary, and they can be off 4.5 days a week or work 4 days. And like, you can have this balance because the restaurant has enough revenue and enough finances to support that.
I can hear our audience already. I can hear him saying, impossible. He's lying. It's never going to work. There's no way that people can have 4.5 days off a week and get paid a good salary. This is all bullshit. I mean, I can see it now, but that's only because people, I think, are so disillusioned with a new way of working and new concepts and new strategies, and also their environments. They're only going on based on what they're on. So give us an idea, I guess, from a business owner's perspective. Customers obviously good, despite the fact that perhaps the value of the offering was maybe higher than what you might get at sort of a fast chain restaurant.
I was going to say, I mean, like, I think people are still, like, even coming on the back end of like COVID, people are still probably not wanting and willing to spend as much, or not wanting to be locked in on spending as much. Because like I talked to a couple of people like from some of the reservation applications here in New York, and they're just trying to say that the biggest trend of like 2024 was like wanting to go out to restaurants that are like a la carte only. And like people just want to go out and like and have the option to have like a few less dishes and things like that. So pretty much to do that for the sake of like your employees and everything, the amount of guests that you need to do, like the high turnover is huge. It's like really big numbers. And it's like, and even then, if you're working in New York, and if you were to apply that, like if I was to get the guys to work 4 days a week, and so they get paid by the hour. It's like if they're cutting their hours and you live and rent in New York, it's not a good way to live. Like you're going to really struggle. And like to get that wage up high enough where you could do it is not particularly feasible for a business yet. I've heard of some restaurants that can do it, but these are some of the places that are like the 3 stars, and they can charge, $600 per head, and then they do 80 covers. And then it's like, okay, then you do have the money to pay someone that kind of wage. That's the only time I've kind of heard of it really existing here.
So we still got to try and work out. I mean, it's interesting. Like, I've had a conversation before with a business owner who was based in the UK, and he was saying to me, my turnover's high. He said, we're open 7 days a week at the moment, and I just don't know what to do. We're not making enough money. And I said, okay. I said, what are your quietest days? He says, well, quietest? He said, I can tell you my busiest. I said, no, what are your quietest days? He goes, well, Mondays and Tuesdays are quite quiet. And I said, okay, go back, have a look at your visitor numbers, have a look at your expenses for energy, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, work out how much money you're losing. And he went, well, I've never done it day by day. I said, yeah, but go back and do it. And he realized, he came back to me shortly afterwards, and he said, fucking hell, I was hemorrhaging cash on the Mondays and Tuesdays because I was paying people to be there. They could have had time off. We weren't getting customs. It was costing us so much money to stay open. Since we've shut that, the team are a lot healthier. They're a lot happier. They're getting on better. They're performing better. Their customers are happier, and we're making money now. And I think that's just an example, but I think that we just need to be a little bit more dynamic with structures and processes, and rather than just trying to replicate. And I guess that's the benefit that you've got. You've seen hygge over in Denmark, and I was over in Copenhagen last year, and again, everyone's just so chill. Like people are jumping in the river first thing in the morning. I mean, this was during the winter, and people were still jumping in the river and swimming.
I remember doing that. It's crazy.
I went outside of my hotel because one of our partners was out there, and there was just this guy, and he was walking through the cobbled street completely and utterly starkers. And I was like, God, they got some interesting people around this neck of the woods. And the guy who I was with was Danish. He was like, No, man, he's just going for a swim, and he literally just jumped off into the water. It must have been about 1-2 degrees max. Had a swim, had a paddle, and I was like, what a lifestyle. This is incredible. And as I looked around, I could see more and more bodies in the water and people just having the cold dip. But moving on to your restaurant then. So you've taken all of these experiences. Oh, actually, hold on. Before we go on to that, I'm interested to learn which country or which environment you were in that perhaps didn't get hygge, like the complete opposite of hygge, like it was a shitstorm, people weren't well. Like, what was that environment like? And yeah, how long were you there for?
I was going to say, it's very hard because two places. One working in Australia at different restaurants that are working for guys that came from different cultures. So they weren't like Australians that I was working for in these couple of restaurants, but it's like, especially both of them were new openings, and then you ended up working like 110 hours, that's 6 18-hour days, just absolutely broken by the end of it. I found that to be quite difficult. Also, actually working in Belgium. Belgium's an interesting culture because they just work insanity. Like, again, when you get into these places where you're on a salary and they can just get you to work, and then you're in that kind of like, cog in the wheel and supporting it. You're like, all right, yeah, let's just go. Especially when I first, moved over there, I didn't really know. It was a restaurant out in the middle of nowhere, and you're just doing, again, 110 hours. I went through about a whole year of that before you start to catch on. You're like, no, I can't. It's not really worth it. And then the same thing also happens in South Korea. it could be any place that you're on a salary and there's no day limit. You're just getting paid the salary, and then you're kind of getting forced to work. So that happened over, the course of 3 different countries. And I think that was just always the common denominator, where it's like, there's no way to control it and you can do as many days as possible. Then that's the trouble you're kind of in.
Yeah. Well, we saw the same over here just before COVID, where we had a lot of chefs who were leaving the industry and going, well, not leaving the industry, but leaving full-time employment, salary employment, and going to agency. And they're like, yeah, we're earning $25 an hour and it's so much better in terms of pay. But actually, you'd speak to them 3 months later and they're like, yeah, no, I've left that place. I was like, why'd you leave? They're like, oh, because I was doing 100 hours a week there. And even though they were getting paid the hourly salary, which was brilliant, and it was what a lot of them were worth, what it actually transpired is that there was no work-life balance. And as you say, if you are just expected to cover because you're 3 down all the time and you're the agency chef to cover it, or you're in a position where you're salaried and you're just working your ass off, not getting a bit of thanks, that'll do it. That'll really take its toll. I mean, we talk about mental health. Have you struggled, has there any periods where you've really struggled with it, and then how did you sort of overcome that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, multiple times over my career, especially when you talk about kind of the work-life balance things. And it's like one of the biggest times I actually kind of struggled was when I moved from really high intense jobs, and I moved country to a job that was, imagine moving over to Denmark and things were quite hygge, and you got really comfortable and you've actually got time off for the first time in your life. That's probably the first time I struggled because I didn't know what to do with the time. And it was like, you didn't have anything in place. You just worked, hundreds of hours per week, and then suddenly it's kind of gone. You're like, oh shit, I'm back to being a person. So that was an interesting transition, especially in a place like Denmark where, you've got 2 months of summer and then, 10 months of winter and it's dark. And that was my kind of first real glimpse into geez, am I okay? You try to figure yourself out, but you're also really lucky in Denmark because you're just surrounded by people also in hospitality, also all international travelers. So that was a good way to kind of get through it, and you spend a lot of time hanging out together, and you go do all the fun touristy kind of things in Denmark, and you get used to it. And then the kind of times afterwards was definitely in Korea when you're in a place and you don't really speak the language and you've got no one to communicate with. You end up spending a lot of time alone. But then at the same time, the ways I kind of got through that during that period is I was just calling all my friends back in Denmark. It was they all had about the same time off, so you just call them every couple of days. You feel a bit down, you just call a mate, have a chat and see what's going on. And that was kind of the best ways I found to deal with it. And then halfway through Korea, Korea's got this quite amazing thing where they've got a calisthenics park on every corner. So I could just go out and train. As soon as I wasn't working, I'd just go out and just train, just jump on the bars or whatever, and just, that was a really good way to get through it. And then you go back, practice a bit of Korean, start integrating yourself into society a bit more. And that was the couple of ways I've kind of dealt with it in the past.
And then class ways as well, building connection, making sure you're not isolated. And I think it's such an interesting point. The number of people that I spoke to over lockdown was shitty for a lot of people. I mean, myself included. All of a sudden, you're used to running at 100 miles an hour, and all of a sudden you've gone full stop. And there is nothing worse than sitting alone with your thoughts if you're not used to hearing your thoughts. It's like torture, man. Like, yeah, it spiraled me quite low. And so I found, the Burnt Chef project was a way of focusing that energy. But yeah, like making sure that your brain is active and it's moving forward in a positive way, because sometimes I think that, especially in our line of where you're always constantly on the go, that drop in adrenaline and that drop in stress, and all of a sudden that going, it takes adjustment. And I think it's a really important consideration for those who are striving for, and rightly so, for work-life balance. Just be aware that there is going to be that adjustment period whereby you're just going to have to get used to building up hobbies and friendship groups and timescales that don't revolve around work. And I'm not saying don't do it, but it's just something to be mindful of, I think. And fitness, again, like boosting your serotonin, you feel a bit more positive about things. Then you can go and try and learn a brand new language and get used to a new culture, right? So let's talk about your new restaurant. You've been open for how long now?
Yeah, we've been open for about 3 months now. October 16th date. Yeah, so about 3 months in a week, which is it's been fantastic. But again, the work-life balance definitely doesn't exist. I think I've had 1 day off, 2 days off since we opened, which was nice, Thanksgiving and New Year's Day. But again, pretty great. We've had a lot of success, and the restaurant's doing well. We've got guests in, we're busy. It's kind of like quite funny. Like, we start to look at the response like from the guests is like, I went again I wanted to come into, if you're coming into the New York market, and I'm just a guy from Tasmania, I wanted to come in with some like pretty big ideas and let's, some dishes that are a bit, chefy, and then other dishes that are a bit safe. And then you can see from like the clientele and everything, again, you are a new restaurant, even though we have, a bit of pedigree behind us. It's like, that doesn't really matter when you're a new restaurant. Your name basically doesn't exist. And so like some of the courses, you'd see 50% of them kind of come back, and 50% people really get it and they're really into it. People that are foodies, they're like, oh, pumped, super. If they're just coming out, a couple of students coming out for dinner and they just look at what's monkfish liver custard, and you're like, oh, this is going to be tough, huh?
Monkfish liver custard. I mean, there's all sorts of weird and wonderful flavors going on in my mouth now. Before we go on to monkfish liver custard, ACRU, is it short for something? What's the meaning? What's the story behind the restaurant?
No, so the idea for the name for ACRU was it had two different meanings. One was, so ACRU kind of means a raw. So in a different term, in the raw sense of the raw integrity of ingredients. So we tried to locally source everything. Everything has to have a meaning. It has to have a intent behind it. So we get all of our fish and seafood comes from a place called Montauk, which is the end of Long Island. It's 3 hours away, and we can get it in every day. That's the best controllable local seafood that we can get. And then all of our meat and everything, again, locally sourced. We try to keep it to the tri-state area, where our ducks come from upstate, lamb comes from New Jersey, and then our dairy cows also come from upstate. And then also trying to utilize ingredients like dairy cows, a raw ingredient, as a more sustainable beef option than obviously using Wagyu and things like that. And then the other part of crew, is kind of vintage. When you look at the space, it's more of a vintage kind of vibe. It's an old war kind of tavern, a bit of an old long stretch sense to it. And then that's kind of more in the design aspect.
Nice. We've talked about monkfish liver custard, but what's one of your favorite dishes and what's the story behind it?
Yeah, quite funny. I'd say actually, I've had two dishes that I was kind of a bit more attached to. And one was, so we did one at the start. I found a wood that I really liked here. And it's kind of a native wood. So it's a shagbark hickory. And this was just before we opened the restaurant, because we were supposed to open in July last year. So, talking peak tomato season. And so I had these, tomatoes that have been slowly drying over shagbark hickory. And then we made I learned how to make these kind of different teas in Korea, where they make tea from wood. They have things like raisin wood and other hokkainamu, things like that. And so I was making this tea and heavily reduced, and you kind of get the resin and things from it, not resin, but the sugars and things. And then we were glazing them, rehydrating the tomatoes over the burning wood as it was kind of cooking. So it's this sticky wood kind of tasting tomato. And then we'd serve that over a kimchi ice. So hot and cold texture. You do the tomatoes down tableside, and it would just stick and attach to the kimchi ice. So it's quite just huge flavors at the start. And then a lot of people thought it was a bit too far, but again, I still liked it. So it was just one of those kind of really fun ones. But then it really depends on the ratios. And again, as a new restaurant, you're trying to really gauge the perfect portion. And it's quite hard to do that when you've got 10 other problems that are all happening, and then trying to watch the portioning control on that exact thing. It has to be the right amount of ice, and it has to be the right amount of tomatoes in the syrup. It's the only way it's going to work. And then the other one was the monkfish custard. So it's like, we take the monkfish, we kind of cure and brine it. We make it into like a custard, so we can cut just like a nice, really round spoon of it out on the plate. And then around the outside, it was like, again, carrots that were dried and rehydrated in a fermented carrot juice. So a bit acidic, kind of like a carrot raisin. And then puff grains, dried chives. And then we finished it all, then also like a squid bolognese, because I just like kind of like squid noodles. Like, when you do the hoods, freeze it and shave it to get these long kind of luscious noodles through like an XO sauce. And then we finished the whole thing off with a fermented carrot hot sauce. They're quite like the American hot sauces, where they're really acidic, vibrant, and like kind of spicy. So we made a hot sauce with fermented carrot juice, kimchi, and XO, and like a little bit of like, roasted pumpkin and doenjang. And put all that together, you just got this big, massive amounts of flavor, which every time I did kind of like a tasting and things like that, it's like I kept getting told it's too much. You need to dial it back a little bit, like dial it back with a dashi or something. And I was like, nah, I'm not doing that. Just got to keep going for it.
Mate, I'm there for those flavors. Like, I'm all about bold. Like, if you give me a jug of jus, I'll drink it quite happily. Like, I just need those bold like flavors. Or the miso. Christ, I cover so much in miso glazes. That has to have that like deep umami flavoring, or that like really rich flavoring I quite like, or a bit of spice isn't too bad as well. But so how many covers is the restaurant?
We do about 47 covers, 47 seats, and then we can go up to about 80 plus covers.
And of course, you guys are getting hit by that massive blast at the moment, so things are in a little bit of a weird state, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're doing what we can to keep the guests everything encouraged, but again, it's like, if we also only do one turn's fine. It's like you do the 47, and it's like you can sit here for a bit longer, get warm, and then we'll treat you. You want to sit back, have a longer glass of wine. It's totally fine at the moment. We've kept everything a bit reduced at the moment.
And I guess then from, without committing you're early business, finding your feet, getting yourselves into a pattern. What from the different influences that you've taken on from your travels are you looking at implementing within the restaurant? And I'm not talking about necessarily the food influences, but more the cultural and the procedural influences. What is it that maybe not necessarily right now, as you say, it's balls to the wall, just trying to make sure that, the business is on the map, it's getting seen, and that's always a challenge. But when things settle down, what would be your dream?
I don't know. I mean, it's actually kind of like some of the small changes that we tried to make from the very start. And it's just like kind of, everyone kind of takes family meal a bit differently in in different countries. But what we really try to instill here, because you keep, the term's always used around, it's family meal, it's, staff meal, whatever. And it's like, my always grand vision was so basically we set everything down on the table, and I really force everyone to sit down. It's all on shared plates, as if you're with your family at home. And then you've got a big plate of food, and you have to pass plates, you have to share, because then you have to integrate with the other team members and the other staff members, whether it's front of house or back of house. And we have this kind of integration where it's no matter what happens, you're sitting down, we're going to have this family meal, and you have to kind of talk with everyone. We can talk, don't talk about the restaurant, talk about different ideas, talk about, try and get a culture going in that sense. And that's something that I found to be extremely beneficial, because none of the people that work here have really seen that before. And it was a really important idea. Instead of just where you have your buffet line, and then everyone just kind of goes up, takes a plate, and then goes and does their own thing. It's no, I really want to force kind of a family integration kind of here.
And that's something that I just assume. I should never assume in hospitality, but I had thought that, especially in the service profession, right, where we're spending so much time looking after other people, I thought that sort of style was normal. But the guys that are working with you, guys and girls, have not experienced that before, no?
No, it doesn't seem to be too much. I mean, we definitely try to go over the top with it, using, even more the funny thing is, not even, doesn't seem to be so common here to use, the restaurant's plates. So, usually you have, staff meal plates that are plastic so you can't break them. And it's I just think that's absolute insanity. It's we're just as important as the guests that are coming in, to look after your staff members. It's that's important. You should eat off the same plates. It's if one breaks, it's the same thing that happens in service. Sometimes it just happens. So we shouldn't be stressed about these kind of things. So, we want to eat off the same stuff. We want the nice silverware or the vintage ware that we have, just having a nice glass of water instead of having a plastic cup. Those kind of things just seem so crazy to me when I kind of came over. And it's we deserve nice things. We work pretty hard, guys. Come on.
It's just every single individual within that business, within any business, is likely to touch a plate in a glass. it would have gone through everyone's hands at some stage, and then not to give your team the same cutlery and crockery that that they handle professionally every single day of their life anyway. It's just
no, exactly. So I mean, the other things that we kind of just try to instill here, I'm trying to think of like, what's going to really kind of add to the culture, and it's just like, we just try to do more educational things as a team, and it's like, integrate, because we're kind of in this tough position where everyone's kind of locked in on their hours, and you can't really do more outside, obviously, which is great due to labor laws and things. So it's like, you want to keep, even now at the moment, we're doing about to do a knife sharpening class. We've got some of the front of house, back of house in, and we're going to go through with the company. So we also try to go out fishing, with the fish supplier early in the mornings, or so we'll go up to the farms, and it's like, they're just the kind of simple things. I know a lot of restaurant things do, but especially in a kind of high intense environment like New York, I think it's kind of really good to make the extra effort to do it. So not a lot of places do that. And then also we have we have fun nights and events here where it's like, you just hang out after work and we'll just get some Popeyes or something, and then sit around and just have a chat, talk about the industry, talk about what's going on in everyone's lives, and how we can kind of grow and move forward.
That's important. Again, it goes back to those things that helped you when you were not feeling your best. It's that connection. It's that good food. It's making sure that people have that opportunity to take a deep breath and take a step away. If that is going fishing or foraging or anything like that is ideal, really, isn't it? I wouldn't even know where. Is there places to forage locally, or are you banned from foraging in the park?
No, mate. I've got caught out a couple of times, that's for sure.
Oh, look, there's chicken in the wood. There's hen in the wood. Right, I'm just going to climb the tree and go grab that.
Yeah, it's quite funny because actually in Central Park, there's one shagbark hickory tree. There's one in there. And so we were doing an event with quite a famous chef, and he really wanted it. So I was like, I know where to get it, mate, but I don't know if we should. It's quite hard to kind of develop these senses, especially for foraging, because again, as you're right, you need to be out there touching something green. And if you're not doing that, you're just caught up in this city and everything. It's really not going to be beneficial for your mental health for sure. But to get out and to go foraging, it's a bit of distance. You really got to dedicate a day to it to get out there, and you have to go upstate, or you can go along the coastal line in New York. So a couple of the guys who live out in Brooklyn, it's a bit closer and easier for them. You can just go even 40 minutes in the other direction on the train line, drop off, you're on the beach, and you can grab some sea herbs and things like that. So it is possible, but a lot harder to kind of instill.
Yeah, I can imagine. So to wrap this up, because I know it's 9 o'clock out there now?
Yeah, 11 o'clock now.
11. Probably going to get ready for hopefully a nice and busy day if people can get through the Arctic blast to get to you, which I'm sure they will do. But if people wanted to, find your restaurant, so if they're listening there from NY currently, or even wanting to travel to you, whereabouts are you? How can they get to you?
We're on 79 McDougall Street down in the West Village. It's like a smaller restaurant. You can catch a subway down, or I would highly recommend a city bike, as even if it's a bit cold, it's a good bit of weather to catch, get yourself a bit alive and blood pumping.
Nice, thank you, mate. And in terms of your book as well, because I'm very interested in it myself, I think, for multiple reasons, obviously. Where can people purchase that? Where's it available if they're not based in States?
The only place you can actually get it right now is Amazon.
Okay.
So I'll send you a link for that one. I'll send you a book just for you to have a look at and see what you think. It's a relatively small book, and it was a project I did when I was quite young, and I've definitely learned a bit more since then, but I still stand by it. It was a fun book, and I enjoyed doing it.
Would you do another one?
Definitely do another one, yeah. We kind of produced that book in about 6 months or so, and it's you can see why a lot of people that write books and do everything can take up to 3 years or so. If I was to do another one, I'd definitely take a lot more time and really get as much information as humanly possible, and then kind of dialed it in.
Thank you, mate. I'm taking a look at it. It is available on Amazon currently, so head over there. 2021, hey? So, yeah, a few years under your belt, a few different experiences. It'll be quite interesting to see what the next one is. And when it does come live, let us know, and we'll help promote it for you. But finally, to finish up on, if you're traveling back now to Tasmania, back when you're 16, you meet a younger version of yourself. I'm curious, out of all of the experiences and all the places that you've traveled and different cultures, what one singular piece of advice would you give to your younger self if you were to meet them in the flesh?
It's quite tough. Yeah, the only thing I'd say is just be resilient. It's always going to get tough. Just keep going. Keep your friends close, keep your family close. It's really important. Look for the resources. I definitely took a lot of hardship on myself, and it was my mistakes and my fault, and I was quite brutal towards myself. And that would be something I'd just be, it's all right, mate. You're doing a good job. Keep going.
Mate, I think that's a brilliant way to end this podcast. So, Daniel, thanks ever so much, mate. Best of luck with the new business. I'm sure it'll be a massive success. And yeah, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for that, mate. Great chat.
Cheers.